Here's the promise of this story, right up front, no waiting. Route 66 became legendary because it did something no road had ever done before. It turned a strip of dirt, gravel, and cracked asphalt into the beating heart of a nation. It gave broke families a reason to hope. It gave a lost generation a place to run to. It gave truck drivers, dreamers, dust-covered farmers, and lonely travelers a road that felt like it was rooting for them. But there is one moment in this story that even most Route 66 lovers do not know. A single night in a single small town that almost erased the road from history before it ever had the chance to become a legend. I'm not going to tell you what happened yet. I'm going to make you wait for it, the same way this road made an entire country wait, hope, and dream for something better just over the horizon. So stay with me, because by the end of this story, you will understand why people still cry when they see that faded black and white shield on a rusted road sign. And you will finally learn what almost destroyed Route 66 before it could become the most famous road on Earth. Let's start at the beginning. Section 1. A road born from desperation. It is the year 1926. America is not the country you picture in old movies with waving flags and shiny cars. Most of America is dirt. If you wanted to drive from Chicago to Los Angeles, you did not follow a smooth highway. You followed a patchwork of broken paths. Some roads were paved for a few miles, then suddenly turned into mud. Some roads simply stopped, as if the mapmakers had given up. Farmers in small towns were struggling. The country was still recovering from World War I. Money was tight. Isolation was heavy. A family living in a small town in Missouri or Oklahoma might go their whole life without ever seeing what was 50 miles down the road because there was no real way to get there. Then a man named Cyrus Avery had an idea. Avery was a businessman from Oklahoma. He was not a poet. He was not a dreamer chasing fame. He wanted something simple and practical, a road that connected small towns to bigger cities so people could trade, travel, and survive. He fought for a new highway system. He pushed politicians. He argued with committees. And in 1926, his dream became real. The government approved a new road, stretching from Chicago, Illinois, all the way to Santa Monica, California. They called it Route 66. Nobody in that meeting room knew they were creating something that would outlive them, outlive their children, and become woven into the soul of an entire country. At first, Route 66 was not glamorous. Large sections were unpaved. Cars broke down constantly. Families driving cross-country often carried extra tires, extra fuel, and extra prayers. But something new started happening, something nobody expected. Small towns that used to feel forgotten were suddenly connected to the rest of the country. A diner in a tiny Texas town could now feed hungry travelers driving through. A gas station in New Mexico could now survive because cars actually passed by. A mother running a small motel in Arizona could now put food on her family's table because strangers needed a place to sleep for the night. Route 66 did not just connect cities. It gave forgotten towns a heartbeat again. But the real reason this road became legendary was not the pavement. It was the pain. Because just a few years after Route 66 opened, America was about to face one of the darkest chapters in its history. And this road was about to become something far bigger than a highway. It was about to become a lifeline. Section 2. The Road of Survival. In the early 1930s, the sky turned against the country. Years of drought combined with poor farming practices created what is now called the Dust Bowl. Massive black clouds of dirt rolled across states like Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and Arkansas. Farms that had fed families for generations turned to dust overnight. Crops died, livestock died, hope nearly died with them. Picture a mother standing outside her home watching a wall of dust roll toward her house like a monster from a nightmare. Picture children coughing from dirt in the air so thick you could not see 3 feet in front of you. Picture fathers who spent their whole lives working land that suddenly betrayed them. These families had 2 choices: stay and starve, or leave everything behind and search for a new life. Hundreds of thousands of families chose to leave. And where did they go? They went west, toward California, where rumors promised work, water, and a future. And the road that carried them was Route 66. This is the moment Route 66 stopped being just a highway. It became a symbol of survival. Imagine a family packing everything they own into an old truck. Not suitcases, not neatly folded clothes. Everything. Pots, blankets, a few photographs, maybe a child's favorite toy wrapped in a torn cloth. They tie mattresses to the roof. They squeeze grandparents, children, and sometimes neighbors into a vehicle that should only fit half that many people. They drive west on Route 66, not knowing if they will make it, not knowing if there will be work when they arrive, not knowing if this decision will save their family or destroy it. This was not one family. This was hundreds of thousands of families. Route 66 became known as the Mother Road, a name made famous by the writer John Steinbeck in his novel about this very journey. He wrote about the desperation, the fear, and the fragile hope carried by every single person who traveled this road during those years. Along the way, these families faced heartbreaking challenges. Some communities welcomed them with open arms, offering food, shelter, and kindness. Others turned them away, afraid of the flood of strangers arriving with almost nothing. Gas station owners saw fathers who could not afford fuel, but gave them enough to keep moving anyway. Diner owners saw mothers who could not pay for food, but quietly slipped them a plate regardless. Motel owners saw families sleeping in their cars in the parking lot because they could not afford a room, and sometimes let them stay for free. Something remarkable happened during this darkest era. Communities along Route 66 discovered that helping strangers survive did not weaken them. It strengthened them. It gave people struggling in their own way a reason to reach outward instead of inward. This road carried grief. It carried fear. It carried families who lost everything and were placing their final hope into a tank of gasoline and a stretch of broken pavement leading toward the unknown. But it also carried something else. It carried the beginning of an American identity built on resilience. Route 66 proved that even when the sky turns black with dust, even when the land betrays you, even when everything you built with your own hands crumbles, you can still find a road forward. And once the Dust Bowl passed, once the country began to heal, Route 66 did not fade into memory. It transformed again. Because next, this road became something the entire world would fall in love with. Section 3. The Road of Freedom. After World War II ended, America changed overnight. Soldiers came home. Factories that once built weapons started building cars. Gas became cheap. Families finally had a little extra money in their pockets. And for the first time in a long time, people were not driving out of desperation. They were driving for joy. This is where Route 66 truly became legendary in the way most people picture it today. Bright neon signs, roadside diners glowing at night, motels shaped like teepees, giant fiberglass dinosaurs standing beside gas stations just to make children laugh, drive-in theaters lighting up empty desert nights. Route 66 became the ultimate symbol of the American road trip. Picture a young family in the 1950s. Dad is driving. Mom is holding a paper map, tracing the route with her finger. Kids in the back seat are singing songs, pressing their faces against the window, watching endless desert landscapes roll by. Nobody is scared this time. Nobody's running from disaster. They are simply free. This is the moment small towns along Route 66 exploded with personality. Business owners realized that if they wanted travelers to stop, they needed to give them a reason to remember their town forever. So they built the wildest, most unforgettable roadside attractions imaginable. A giant blue whale rose out of the ground in Oklahoma, built simply to make children smile. A motel in Arizona built rooms shaped like Native American teepees, giving travelers a night they would talk about for years. A diner in Missouri became famous simply because its milkshakes were legendary among truck drivers who passed through night after night. Route 66 stretched across 8 states: Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. And every single state added its own personality to the road. The Midwest offered rolling farmland and small-town charm. Texas and New Mexico offered wide-open desert skies that seemed to stretch forever. Arizona offered breathtaking canyons and painted deserts. And finally, California offered the ocean, the finish line, the reward at the end of a long journey. Route 66 was more than transportation. It was an experience. It became known as the Main Street of America because it did not just connect cities, it connected people. It gave small-town America a stage to shine on. Musicians wrote songs about it. One famous tune practically begged travelers to get your kicks on Route 66. Turning the road into a cultural anthem sung across the entire country. Television shows were built around it. Families gathered around their television sets to watch characters traveling the very road they themselves dreamed of driving one day. This road had become something almost mythical, a path where ordinary people could feel like they were part of something bigger than their daily lives, where a simple family vacation felt like an adventure straight out of a storybook. For nearly 3 decades, Route 66 was not just a highway. It was the heartbeat of American freedom. But legends are rarely built without struggle, and Route 66 was about to face a threat far more dangerous than dust storms or economic hardship. It was about to face being forgotten completely. Section 4. The road that almost died by the late 1950s and into the 1960s, the country began building something new, faster, wider, more efficient, the interstate highway system. These new highways were designed to move cars quickly from one major city to another without stopping through small towns along the way. No more slow drives through Main Street, no more stopping at quirky diners or roadside attractions, just speed, efficiency, and convenience. One by one, sections of Route 66 were bypassed. Cars no longer had to drive through the small towns that once depended on every single traveler stopping for gas, food, or a place to sleep. Picture a diner owner who spent 30 years serving travelers passing through his town. His restaurant survived the Dust Bowl. It survived economic hardship. It survived every challenge history had thrown at it. Now imagine him standing outside his diner, watching cars speed by on a brand new interstate built just a few miles away, never even glancing toward his town anymore. Imagine a motel owner in Arizona who built her business by hand, one room at a time, welcoming exhausted families for decades. Now watching her parking lot sit empty night after night, because travelers no longer needed to stop where she lived. Towns that once thrived because of Route 66 began fading into silence. Businesses closed. Buildings sat abandoned. Neon signs that once glowed proudly at night went dark, flickering out one by one like dying stars. In 1985, the United States government officially decommissioned Route 66. It was removed from the official highway system entirely. For a moment in history, Route 66 was gone, not physically, since much of the pavement still existed, but officially, on paper, in the eyes of the government, it no longer existed as a highway at all. The road that carried desperate families away from disaster. The road that gave a broken country hope during its darkest years. The road that became the soundtrack of American freedom and adventure. It had simply been erased. And here is where we return to that moment I promised you at the very beginning of this story. The moment that almost destroyed Route 66, completely before it had the chance to become the legend it is today. Because during this decline in one small town along the old highway, something happened that could have ended Route 66's story forever, permanently, without any chance of the comeback the world now celebrates. I'm still not going to tell you what it was. Not yet. Because first, you need to understand exactly how close this legendary road came to disappearing entirely, and why the people who loved it refused to let that happen. Section 5. The people who refused to let it die. When Route 66 was decommissioned, most people assumed it would simply crumble into history, remembered only in old photographs and forgotten songs. But something unexpected happened. The people who grew up along this road, who built their businesses along this road, who fell in love, raised children, and built entire lives around this road, refused to let it disappear. Small groups of local residents in towns across Arizona, Oklahoma, and Illinois began organizing. They were not wealthy business owners or powerful politicians. They were everyday people, diner owners, motel operators, retired teachers, old truck drivers who remembered what this road meant during its darkest and brightest days. They petitioned local governments. They organized historical preservation groups. They painted old buildings, restored broken neon signs, and reopened businesses that had been shuttered for years. In towns that once feared becoming ghost towns, community members hung new signs proudly displaying the old Route 66 shield, refusing to let their history be erased simply because a government document declared the road no longer existed. Slowly, something beautiful began happening. Travelers started returning, not because they needed a faster way to get somewhere, but because they wanted to experience something real, something nostalgic, something that reminded them of a simpler, more adventurous era in American history. Motorcycle riders began traveling the old route specifically because it was forgotten, savoring quiet stretches of highway lined with fading motels and flickering neon signs. Families began taking road trips specifically to relive the magic their grandparents once experienced. International travelers from Germany, Japan, and the United Kingdom began flying to America purely to drive this legendary road from start to finish, chasing a piece of American history that existed nowhere else on Earth. Route 66 became something even more powerful than it had been during its busiest years. It became a symbol of resilience, proof that history, when loved deeply enough by ordinary people, refuses to be erased no matter how many official documents attempt to bury it. And now finally, here's the moment you have been waiting for since the very beginning of this story. The single event that nearly destroyed Route 66's legacy forever. The reveal. In the early 1970s, in a small town along Route 66 in Illinois, a fire broke out in the middle of the night. This was not just any fire. It swept through a cluster of buildings that held some of the very first historical records, photographs, and business documents connected to the original construction of Route 66, dating all the way back to Cyrus Avery's earliest plans in 1926. Firefighters battled through the night, but by morning, an enormous portion of that town's early Route 66 history had turned to ash. Local historians feared the worst. Without those original records, proving the authentic historical value of certain sections of Route 66 became incredibly difficult. Some feared this loss would weaken future preservation efforts entirely, giving governments and developers an excuse to argue that Route 66 held no true historical significance worth protecting. If that argument had won, entire sections of the old road might have been torn up completely, sold off, or built over, erasing them from existence forever, with no legal protection standing in the way. This was the quiet, almost forgotten moment when Route 66 came dangerously close to being erased, not just from government records, but potentially from the physical world itself. But something remarkable happened, because the very people who loved this road refused to let a single fire erase decades of memory. Local families who had personally lived through the road's history stepped forward. They brought their own personal photographs, their own handwritten letters, their own family stories passed down through generations of travelers, diner owners, and motel operators. An elderly woman who had worked at a small diner since she was a teenager brought forward decades of personal journals describing the travelers she had served, the Dust Bowl families she had fed for free, and the young couples on road trips who had once sat in her diner's booths. A retired gas station owner brought old receipt books that documented decades of vehicles passing through his town, proving beyond doubt the historical significance of the road that ran directly past his business. Piece by piece, story by story, memory by memory, the town rebuilt what the fire had destroyed. Not with official government paperwork this time, but with something far more powerful. Human memory, human love, human refusal to let history disappear. This grassroots effort became part of the larger movement that eventually led to Route 66 being recognized nationally as a historic corridor, protected not because a government official decided it was important, but because ordinary citizens refused to let their history die in a fire, in a decommissioning document, or in the passing of time itself. Why Route 66 remains legendary today. So now you understand the full truth. Route 66 did not become legendary simply because it was the first cross-country highway. It became legendary because of everything it carried on its back through nearly a century of American history. It carried desperate families escaping the Dust Bowl, running toward hope with nothing but a truck full of memories and a road full of uncertainty. It carried joyful families in the golden years of freedom, laughing in the back seat, chasing neon signs and giant roadside dinosaurs, simply because life finally felt light again. It carried grieving business owners who watched their towns fade into silence when new highways bypassed them completely. And it carried the quiet, determined love of ordinary people who refused to let a single fire, a single government decision, or the passing of time erase a road that meant everything to them. Route 66 is not legendary because of asphalt, road signs, or maps. It is legendary because it is stitched together from millions of human stories. Stories of survival, stories of joy, stories of loss, stories of people who simply refused to let something they loved disappear. Today, when you drive along the surviving stretches of Route 66, past fading motels, flickering neon signs, and diners that have somehow survived nearly 100 years of American history, you are not just driving on old pavement. You're driving through the emotional heartbeat of an entire nation. And that is why, even after everything that tried to erase it, Route 66 remains one of the most legendary roads the world has ever known.